Hi, this is the SRI 8610GC, and this little video is going to focus on how to take the FID detector apart, clean the collector electrode, install a new igniter, and then put it back together. So lift the red lid, and then remove the screw that holds the insulation cover. Pull the insulation cover off, and then gently remove the insulation. You'll be reusing this, so try not to break it in the process. There's a couple little pieces. So now we need to remove the collector electrode wire, so that just slips right off the collector electrode like that. And then we need to remove the two igniter wires that are clipped into this little speaker terminal clip. So it doesn't really matter which way they go in, so you don't have to mark them. And then we need to remove the air supply. The FID uses hydrogen and air, and this is where the air comes into the FID detector through this little bulkhead fitting like so. Then take a 7/16 wrench and remove the FID detector from the bulkhead fitting like so. So now it's out and we can do what we want. So the igniter plugs into this little speaker terminal like this. This is the igniter out of the FID detector, just so you can see what it does. So when you turn on the GC, the igniter glows kind of a dull red temperature. It's really about 800 degrees centigrade, so that's hot enough to light the flame. And if you flip this little switch on the front panel, then the igniter actually gets brighter. It goes up to 10 volts. Normally we set it at 8, and you can read that voltage on the front panel of the GC here on the display. When you hit the button that's called Flame Ignite, you can see here it's saying -807, which means -8.07 volts. So that's kind of important, and it's good to understand what the igniter does, which is to light the flame and prevent the flame from going out. So this is what the FID detector looks like in the GC without all the stuff that it's connected to. So the column from the column oven comes into the bulkhead fitting here that the FID is screwed into. See, so the FID goes into this bulkhead fitting, and there's another leg here, which is where the hydrogen comes into the FID. If the carrier is not hydrogen, then you need to supply hydrogen through this little fitting here, and all of this is buried in the heater block that the FID is mounted in. So this would be at some temperature like 150 or 250 or 350 degrees, and the FID fits into that. The column comes in here and either has hydrogen itself, or it merges with the hydrogen and then ends up at the flame jet of the FID detector, which is right in the middle of that fitting. So let's take this apart. You'll need a 9/16 wrench. So we'll remove the collector electrode. And the collector electrode looks like that. This is the collector electrode that we've been using since around 2010. Previously to that, we used a collector electrode that looked a little different. Like this was the insulator, this polyamide ferrule. Now the insulator is this alumina ceramic. So this works better than that. So if you have this old style, it still works, but it'd be better to call us and get one of these new style collector electrodes. So the collector electrode is what collects the ions that are produced in the flame. When the flame happens, there's plus and minus ions produced when hydrocarbons burn, and the little plus and minus ions are repelled by this -8 volts on the igniter, and then attracted by the plus 24 volts on the collector electrode. So this is the collector electrode that just sits there and attracts the negative ions. So then the igniter is sitting immediately below the flame. It's hot, and it can't really touch the flame, it just has to be below the flame and ignite it. So it's best to make a little magic marker mark on the igniter before you remove it. So make a magic marker mark so you know which way is front, because it's hard to tell sometimes when this igniter rotates in the fitting as you tighten up the nut. So I'm going to loosen it with the nut, and then I'm going to hold this while I use my other hand to loosen the nut, so that then I can pull the igniter out. So you'll notice the igniter has a slight backward tilt to it, so it's important to put it in the correct direction. That's why we made the magic marker mark, so that we could tell which way was front, and as we tighten it up, not twist this, because you can break this if you catch it on something and then twist. It's a ceramic, silicon carbide, so it's fragile, so you have to be careful not to break it. It's brittle. So then inside the FID detector we have the jet. I don't know if the camera can really see this, but there's a little jet that looks kind of like a propane torch, the end of a propane torch, right in the middle of that fitting. You can kind of see it. In real life it's easy to see. I'm not sure if the camera can get a good view of it. But the collector electrode needs to be just at the end of the flame. There's a little tiny flame in the middle there, so the collector electrode is at the end of the flame, and the igniter is just below and behind the jet, just like in this little drawing right here. The igniter is just below and behind the flame, and the collector electrode is just past the flame, so any ions that are produced in the flame are repelled by this and then attracted to that, and that's how the FID detector measures the ions that are produced when hydrocarbons burn. So there's really nothing to break inside this. You could clean it if you like, but it's usually not necessary, so it's very seldom necessary really to take the FID detector apart. But let's put it back together. So I'm going to take the collector electrode, which is held in place by a nut with a graphite ferrule, a soft graphite ferrule. So the soft graphite ferrule fits over the alumina part of the igniter, and then the nut just tightens it up. It doesn't have to be very tight. It really only has to be tight enough that it doesn't fall out. It's not like we're trying to make this a bubble tight FID detector, because there's many paths for the gas to escape. So as you're tightening it up, hold this so that it doesn't turn, because if it does catch on something and then you twist it, it'll break. And then you have to look down there and position the igniter so that it's just below and behind the jet. It's hard for the camera to see in there because it's small, but once you get a position, you just have to tighten the nut just a little bit so that the igniter can't move. It doesn't have to be extremely tight, just tight enough so that it doesn't move. Yeah. So now we'll put the collector electrode back in. The collector electrode, you could clean it with a piece of sandpaper. I have a piece of sandpaper here. It's like 100 grit sandpaper, but it really doesn't matter what the grit size is. So if you want to, you can take the collector electrode and you can sand off some of the corrosion or the gook or whatever's on there. It usually doesn't accumulate, but it can. So over time, you may want to clean this. It shouldn't be something you have to do very frequently, but when you do, you basically just put it back in. Since 2010, there's been a stop, so you can't really push this in too far. But if your GC is older than that, then you'll have to position it so that the end of the collector electrode is even with the wall of the hole that you're looking down. So it shouldn't be stuck in there like that. It should be right even with the wall as you're looking down. And that results in having about that much of the white part visible when you tighten it up. And again, it doesn't have to be extremely tight, just tight enough so that nothing moves. And then you put the cap back on, and then the whole thing goes back in the GC. So we'll put this back into the bulkhead fitting and then reconnect the air supply. These nuts should just spin on freely with your finger. They shouldn't be that tight that they've been deformed. So when you tighten it up, just snug. It doesn't have to be extremely tight. And then the igniter goes back into the speaker terminals. Doesn't matter which way they go. There's no plus or minus. And then the collector electrode wire gets clipped back on the collector electrode. Tighten up the nut. Make sure everything feels secure. And then put the insulation back. There's this little piece that goes right in like that. And then a bigger piece that goes down here. Keep everything nice and warm. And then the cover. And finally, the screw that holds it all together. So I might want to edit this out. Fighting with the screw. And finally put the screw back in to hold everything together. Okay.